Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. We're here in Portland, Oregon, Northwest Portland, and joined by a dear friend of the program and an unbelievable musician, beautiful cat, David Friesen. Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you, Jake.
It's great to see you again, my brother.
Good to be here in my home.
Can you talk about the when Scotty LaFaro came on your radar?
Oh, wow. I was be probably around 1962 when I first heard Scotty. I had been playing guitar, and then one day in the service club I saw a bass, I picked it up, and it was love at first embrace. It was great, and then I started playing it, and coming from guitar, I guess I had a guitaristic approach to the instrument. And a drummer, a friend of mine there who I had met, said, "Man, you sound like Scott LaFaro." Well, I didn't sound like Scott LaFaro, but conceptually I was moving in that direction, I guess. And so I didn't know who Scott LaFaro was. But I sent away, I was in Germany at the time, Bad Kisken, Germany, in an artillery unit. And so I sent away for the Sunday at the Village Vanguard and the Waltz for Debbie albums.
Yeah.
Which was from, as you know, from the same session that Sunday. But it was so long they went to two segments, two different albums. But, you
Paul
know.
Motian, LaFaro, and Bill Evans.
Paul Motian, Bill Evans, and Scott LaFaro, yeah. And so I heard Scotty then, and of course I could relate to that right away. It made perfect sense to me.
Conceptually, can you talk about, you were heading in that direction. You didn't sound like, what was he doing?
He wasn't playing the traditional bass player roles. He was much more rhythmic in his walking. He played like counterpoint lines with Bill Evans, and it became almost like a free agent, you know, was able to, like a free agent. He could just kind of do what he wanted and not really have to play just the solid, you know, which is cool, and he can do that too, as he did on the double Ornette album, you know, with Charlie Hayden, you know. He certainly played that way, but with Bill Evans it was much more exploratory and inventive and very creative. It was new. It took a left-hand turn, you know. Bass players had been going this way, and he just turned left and took it into a whole other place. You know?
So, I mean, it's focused on the calling, the idea that the music calls you, the music finds you, you don't find the music. And for a long time, well, can you tell the story about Mal Waldron? When he said...
There's many stories.
There's many stories, but he told you one where it was, he said, "I have to do this."
Well, yeah, I was in his apartment. We had just finished a tour, and this was in Munich. Got married again and moved to I think it was Brussels is where he was, or I think it was Brussels. And home, back to America, and Val says, yeah, I'm leaving in 2 days for Japan. I said, and you're 70-some years old at that time, and how can you do that? And he says, if I stop, I die. He says, it's like breathing to me, you know. And, you know, in actuality, that's the truth. I mean, you don't retire from being a jazz musician. I mean, retire to what? Taking out the garbage? You know, we might as well keep playing, you know.
Can you talk about that calling for you? I mean, especially as it relates to your concept of God, because you were trying to figure out why this was something that you were called to do.
Yeah, and I had been seeking for many years why I was playing not only the bass but playing music. It was fun. I enjoyed it. Yeah, it was just the camaraderie was nice. The social part was really nice. And I enjoyed the feeling of playing jazz. But for me, there had to be more of a reason, you know. Who created me? Why was I created? For what purpose? If there's a God, then that God created music. That God created me. That God gave me the gift of music, gave me a desire to play music. So I thought at the time, I says, well, then my first responsibility is not to practice to become a competent musician. My first responsibility is to find out if there's a God. Then God was responsible for everything.
Right.
That was my first place, and I had to find out who created all of this, if there was a creator. And eventually, you know, I did find this out. I found it out in my mother's Jewish, means I'm Jewish. I was raised in the Jewish synagogue, and my dad was a Christian, would preach Jesus to me on the way to temple. When I got to temple, it was just the opposite. So I was very confused.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was a very confused little guy.
Yeah, very confused, yeah.
Baruch atonu Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvot v'tzivanu hadlik ner shams. Okay, I've got all that memorized from Jewish Sunday school. But the thing that drew me to Christ was the unconditional love that God gave to mankind. It was very inviting to me. You know, no person is perfect. All of us, like the Bible teaches, have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Every person. And so what happens when we do that? Well, it's like purchasing something. You can't just do it and then stuff it in the back of your conscience and think it disappears. It doesn't disappear. It's something you actually did. It's a reality, and it stays with you. And what was a blessing for me to learn was that God dealt with that sin by not trying to win God's approval. The fact was, God already loved me. Even though I had done all these bad things, God still loved me. And he dealt with my inadequacies through forgiveness. That was the key word. And since then, I've learned that the epitome of love is forgiveness. It's always easy to love someone when everything's going well. That doesn't take much.
Right. Now
love someone when you've been violated. Where's the power of love then? If love is real, then where is it? Well, God showed his mercy. That was the reality concept of Christ dying on the cross. He paid the price for sins, as the Christian belief teaches us. And so I found that forgiveness and I continued on my way, wondering why I was playing music. I still didn't have an answer. And so I was seeking for a good 20 years. I had a coffee house in Portland, Oregon called Selah.
How do you spell it?
Selah. It's in the Psalms, in the Old Testament. At the end of the Psalms, you'll see a little where it says Selah. And Selah has been explained in a few concordances as a word that says the people should stop singing and now the musicians should improvise on stringed instruments. There was no musical notes found by any musicologist at that time of King David. He had an orchestra of over 2,000 musicians, not including dancers and singers. And it was all improvised music based upon some type of pentatonic scale. So basically the earliest jazz musicians were back there in King David's time. They were improvising.
Absolutely.
So anyways, I was in the coffee house. I was seeking the Lord. I had a puppet show. It's a long story.
No, you told it. It's the most. I wish you could tell the whole story because
it's too long. I mean, Cadence Magazine did a 2-issue story. And a few
you got
other
these
things.
visions though.
Well, I'll explain it to you here. So I just want to take it
Go ahead.
in line. So one day I was practicing at the coffee house, and all of a sudden I saw this vision. And it wasn't the kind of vision where everything outside here changed. It was within me, but it was very real. There was this beautiful pool filled with all these colors. And the Lord walked up with a ladle and dipped the ladle in and let these colors flow out. And these were colors, spiritual colors, that are not like red, blues, yellows, the colors we have here in the reality of this life. They were spiritual colors. I really can't explain. There's nothing here that was like them. But they were beautiful at the time of this vision. And I asked the Lord, I says, what is this? What are you doing? He said, David, this is a substance I'm giving you to put inside the note. And the Lord showed me the note was not music. It's the substance that goes in the note. The note is like a container that takes the notes from the musicians, and it comes out like almost like bubbles, and it splashes on the individual. And if there's no substance in there, that's all they get. It's like having a cup, a beautiful cup, ornate cup with all these beautiful designs. That's technique. That's intellectuality. Beautiful cup. And you go to put the cup into your mouth and there's nothing in there, then all you got is that cup. But when there's the substance in there, that is the part that edifies, comforts, gives hope in a broken world. Something that's real. And you know this is true because you've probably heard musicians with incredible technique, and you sit there and listen, there's nothing there. Nothing to do with concept. It has to do with music. So I says, well, what is this? He says, the substance is my love. And now I want you to go forth and show the glory of the kingdom of God, not by your power, but by my power, and not for your glory, but for my glory. And that was it. As soon as that happened, my music just changed. Suddenly changed. It went in a whole new direction.
Less about facility and more about soul? I mean, what direction are you could you...
Compositionally.
Yeah. The way you write, the way you wrote.
The way I write. And
you have a new CD, My Faith, My Love, of that?
Yeah. I play it on piano.
Okay, great.
It's a double CD, a solo bass, which is done on my homage bass, and which is the bass I travel with, and the bass I play with my current trio, Joe Manis on tenor and Charlie Doggett on drums and myself. Tenor, drums, and bass. But if I use this, I'd never be heard, because I won't put a pickup on this bass. This bass was made in 1795, was used in an orchestra that Beethoven once guest conducted.
Whoa.
And there's no way I'm going to put a pickup on this. It wasn't made for a pickup. It wasn't made to come through speakers. It was made to be just to be played acoustically. So I used my homage, which was designed to be amplified, and it's got a beautiful sound. I love it. But let me play a piece from the piano.
Absolutely. here in the home of David Friesen here. Epic shot of all-star crew of Mike Knock and Joe.
Called Sequence. I like to lift this up if I'm going to play it. Then,
Yeah.
that's a piece called Sequence.
Did you play tenor, bass, and drums with Joe Henderson?
Did I play tenor?
Well, you made this. I just found it
Oh.
fascinating when you talked about the idea of not running amplification through that bass. But I mean, you did that back in the.
With I think on the you're talking about the Amber Skies album was the organ bass, and the table, you know.
Is jazz a language that can be taught? Can the vocabulary of music increase in academia or only on the street? The Longolin, Larry Corey. I mean, listen. I mean, what advice would you give to cats? Would you tell them to drop off the map and listen to records, or what? How do you find?
I think the schools are good. You know, I teach at the Ebersol camp every year, and that's the template for the jazz camps in the world today. You can learn things from that. But I think young musicians, they put all their hopes into, eggs into one basket. I mean, they use that as a means to an end, as opposed to, you gain some information. You don't want to be tied down. You don't want to be bound in the emulative prison. People copy people and do what they do for a variety of reasons. I've never done that. I've never transcribed solos, so I don't know what's running through their minds. There's pros and cons about transcribing solos. I think it works for some people, and for other people it doesn't. You just don't want to get tied down to any one thing. And the whole idea of jazz is it's ever going. I used to think, oh man, I played this wonderful solo, I'll never play it again. But there's always new things coming. It's never ending. It goes on forever. I always like to think of it like, have you ever seen these player pianos where you have those little dots and it rolls, and then the little brass pin goes in the dots, and that's what creates the music. So I'm thinking, when you hit the note, you're unlocking space. You're unlocking part of space and allowing the music's already there. The music's all around us. We just that unlocks a certain part of space and allows that note to come out. It doesn't really come from this piano. This piano is like the key that unlocks what's already there. That's how I see it. That's how I believe it. It all happens,
How responsible was it, your own individual sound, playing with cats like Ralph Towner, or people that would come by and play the dawn sessions at the Longolin, not the Longolin, but at your coffee house? Yeah. Everybody had their own tuning. There was no tuner. You didn't have a tuner. I mean, the point is that you were involved with so many different cats. How much of the experiential stuff that to me is what's lacking today?
Well, my philosophy about practicing in the practice studio is that everything you learn there should give you the confidence, the technique, the flexibility to be able to take your eyes off yourself so you can listen and respond creatively to what you hear. This pertains especially to small group situations. And it's just not to be consumed with yourself. When I played opposite Coltrane in Seattle, I remember, and it's my one regret too, because Jimmy Garrison asked me to stay on the stand and to play with them, and I had just played an hour set, and I needed just to get something to drink and cool out just for a moment, and I was going to go back up, but Coltrane and McCoy and Elvin, they played, and Jimmy, they played.
You didn't get a chance to get back up there.
I didn't get a chance. But as I sat there listening to them, a very interesting thing I noticed is that about 10 seconds after the music started, I didn't notice Coltrane or McCoy or Jimmy Garrison anymore. They had diminished and the music rose to the surface and they became less. And that's what I tried to embrace in all the groups I've had, is that the music takes over and we become less, so we don't dominate. No one person dominates. I've had a lot of really wonderful reviews, been very blessed that way in my life, but I think one of the greatest reviews I ever had, I had a trio back on the East Coast, this I think in the 80s or 90s. We were touring, I forget which city we were on. I think it was someplace upstate. And
who was in the trio?
who was in the trio? I think Phil Dwyer, great tenor player from Canada. And the reviewer says, if you listen to the music, you don't know who the leader is. And I thought that was a real compliment. It means I stayed out of the way and didn't dominate and tried to control the action.
So you weren't wanking it. As some
And it
people
just says they just heard it. They heard three people playing together, and there was no. It was the music was leading, and that's what he was trying to get across. That's what I've tried to do with my groups. It's just, and I do it by not creating a lot of rules and regulations, and no rehearsals, and no arrangement. Definitely no arrangements. I love to play my music and have it different every time I play it. You know.
I want you to tell the audience they're having a ball hearing you, but you want to talk about when Clark Terry kissed you on the cheek?
Was it Clark?
It was Clark because
Oh, yeah.
of this exact thing about arrangement. So I
Oh,
want you
yeah.
to tell that story because to me that is the essence of music.
Yeah, when I was in Europe, and Bud Shank and I were scheduled to do a concert at the Schlossspielhaus in Eastern Berlin, which was the opera house, and Clark flew in, Bud had already arrived. We met him at the airport, and Clark was concerned. He said, "When are we going to rehearse?" I said, "Well, Clark, I don't want to rehearse." He looked at me, his eyes got big. He said, "What?" I says, "Yeah." I says, "You know, you and Bud played together in the Charlie Barnett band." He says, "Yeah, but that was 45 years ago." I says, "Yeah, but you played together, and Bud and I have played together, so we'll just call some tunes that we all love, and we'll just go up there and just be jazz musicians and improvise." And he just got a big smile, and he came over and picked me up, and he kissed me on both my cheeks. He says, "That's the way I learned on the riverboats on the Mississippi." He used to play on the riverboats on the Mississippi. So that was, you know, and I've always liked to play my music that way. It's not perfect music. It's not like a machine gun. Everything's perfect in it. You know, life's not that way. You know.
Just can you the nuances of what he learned on those riverboats was what? I mean, obviously it wasn't about
Spontaneity.
right.
It was a spontaneity.
You can't just go in. You have to know your rudiments, right? I mean, you have to know that it's spontaneity without any arrangement.
Listen, practice, practice, practice. I mean, that's very important. That's what gives you the confidence. That's what gives you the technique and the ability and the flexibility to take your eyes off yourself so you can listen and respond creatively. You were mentioning people like Ralph Towner and Roland Kirk. At that time, his name was Roland Kirk. Different people that would fall by the coffee house and be playing together. I was learning at a very, very early time in my life that listening, as I say in the one book I wrote, listening is my life preserver in the ocean of sound. Without it, I drown.
I love that line. You've said that before. Did you play with Gil Evans ever?
No.
Because
We
Gil
played opposite Gil, but never with him.
when Bones Malone, the trombone player, blues brother, and also played with Gil Evans' big band. They used to go in the back outside Sweet Basil and during intermission and talk. And one night, a sub trumpet player came out back and said, "Gil, I don't know when I'm supposed to play." And Gil said, "You play when you feel like playing, when you feel inspired to play." Billy Harper was in that group. Howard Johnson was in that group.
Billy was in that group. Yeah.
Okay. Now, you know, the idea there is there's no formula to it. When you are inspired, if somebody else is playing, play. If you don't feel like playing, don't play. Suffice it to say, that trumpet player was wildly confused. How do you feel about that whole idea?
No, I mean, that's right. And it's a first impression that comes to you as an artist. You can't underestimate your musicality. That's why putting in the practice time helps that stability and your confidence. So when an idea comes, you don't question it. Because look, that sound, where'd it go? It's in the past. We got clocks that measure time in seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years. That sound now is in the past because we're moving through time. And music is reflective of that time that we're moving through. So when an idea comes to you, you've got to learn, not only learn your scales and arpeggios and chord scale relationships, but you also have to learn to move quickly when that impression comes. And that comes from not doubting. So yeah, play when you feel like playing. When that urge comes, do it in the moment. And that takes practice. You know, it takes practice.
You've used that word a lot, but it also takes 26 cross-country trips to New York from Portland. It takes a devotion, David. Okay, I mean, you can practice. People are practicing, and their facility is great, and people are falling asleep because the passion and the devotion. 26 round trips just to play gigs.
When I had that vision, at that moment, I know why I was created. I had a calling. So once you have that calling, you have a foundation on which to stand and to move. And I knew why I was playing music. And I tell young students this. I said, you know, you have to, it's the first question I ask people that want to study with me. First of all, why are you playing music?
Right.
Then what are your musical needs? And then what are your musical goals? You've got to know who you are and why you're doing what you're doing. And so I really delved into that. It was important for me because that was the foundation on which I was going to stand. For instance, it's like a Mozart or Beethoven living among us, like a genius.
Pawning his sax for junk, but yeah, no doubt.
He was a genius. He was a genius
Stone
musician. But being a genius wasn't enough. He needed something more than that.
Wow.
And that something more is that what I'm talking about. That foundation on which offers you the stability when things aren't going right, when you don't get paid for the gigs, when you have to drive 26 times, which is almost 4 days nonstop from the East Coast to the West Coast to the East Coast. There's got to be some type of foundation on which you're standing. You know why you're doing what you're doing, you know.
Can you talk about a time in your career when you were scuffling and fighting, and how you fought through it, whether you didn't get paid for a gig, or can you make it relative to your own experience?
I've always been blessed. There's been a couple of times when I got by promoters and things, but I've been pretty fortunate. And
in that moment of anger, how did you let it go? How did you let that go?
Well, this has happened maybe half a dozen times. The example I'm going to share with you right now. I did a concert with John Stoll, guitarist.
Dear friend of the pro, I love that cat.
Yeah, John's wonderful. And we were playing together this was in the 70s back in New York. We were a little club in Dobbs Ferry, I believe it was. And the owner was charging like $15, $20 for people to come in. Place was packed. And there were about 5 people at the bar who were drunk and just screaming and yelling and having a good time. We were getting ready to play. So he introduced us. We went up on the stand. And these people at the bar, there were 5 of them, they kept, everyone was quiet. There might have been 80 people in the room. But these 5 people were
belligerent.
Yeah, you could hear it everywhere.
Right.
And these people had paid money to come in. So I was up there, and what I do is I don't tell people to be quiet. I'm not going to do that. But I wait. I just sit there and I'll just wait until they're through, and then I'll start. Well, they didn't quit, and the owner came up to me and says, "What are you doing?" You start the music. I says, "Well," and I says, "Listen, you have these 5 people at the bar. You have 80 people out here who have paid $20 admission to come in to hear the music." And I said, "These 5 people are making all that noise." I says, "Number one is because if the whole club was talking and I was just playing like background music, no problem. I've done that many times. I can do that easily." I said, "But this is a concert.
That's right.
It's not a
It's not the expectation.
money. I said, you have to ask these people either to be quiet or leave. He says, well, I'm not going to do that because they're my friends. So I says, well, you're not going to do anything about that? He says, no. And he kind of belligerently said, now play. And I just kind of shook my hands, okay. So I shut my amplifier off and I started packing my bass. And of course, John started doing the same thing. I paid John what he would have made on the gig. I paid him his money, but I left. The owner was just, he had to return all that money to all those people. They were demanding their money back.
Because he wouldn't remove 5 cats from the bar.
Yeah, so I just said, listen, there's a good bar to see. I says, sorry. And I left. One thing that helped me a little bit, even though I had I had a wife and 4 kids to support. My wife didn't work. She worked at home, but she made the kids clothes. She gave homeschool, and I went out and made the living. But I was not going to be in bondage to money. I was not going to let money rule my life that way. You know, the music has always come first to me. So I left, you know. That's happened maybe 4 or 5 times in my life. So I've been very fortunate. I really haven't had to deal with that too much. And like I say, if I'm in town here, I'm playing little local plays, and the people are all talking. It's not a concert, and people come in to relax. And
no, I dig it. I completely, whatever the expectation is.
Yeah, they can listen or not. I don't care. I'll just play the gig, you know. They don't have to be quiet.
Could you play another piece on your bass?
Yeah. I don't know what I'm
Down too. He's having a ball.
I don't know why I picked that tune. I haven't played that tune by Bill Evans, Miles Davis, called Blue and Green.
Before I let you go, David, you always fill me with so much wisdom and soul. What are you still learning about yourself today?
So when people are hogging the passing lane and they don't pass.
You mean in the group that you would put together?
No, I'm just talking about driving a car on the freeway.
Yeah, that's still an issue, dude.
Well, you know, you asked me what I.
Well, I mean, from the music, people say, you know, you could talk to Denny Zeitlin or Ahmad Jamal. They're all still learning.
Yeah.
So, what are you learning still about the magic of music?
What am I learning? I'm learning all the time. I mean, I just did this wonderful album with this 6-string electric bass player, Bright Gain, and he was showing me some different African rhythms.
Mm-hmm.
Very difficult to do. I mean, some of that stuff from Cuba and Africa, the bass lines sound so simple, but they're not, you know, because they're starting on the andos, and they never do hit one, and stuff sounds simple. So I'm learning a little bit about that from Bright. We're hopefully going to be touring in Nigeria again in April this year.
Nigeria.
I was there last October playing some concerts.
That's fantastic. They're playing the bass lines on the one and like a clock.
All different parts of the beat, you know, and it's not only how you hit it, but it's the feeling of which you hit it. You know, it's like accents and people talking, you know, the Russian language or the whatever, you know. There's a certain accent that you put to the way you say it. So it's not just authentically playing it right, but with the right kind of feeling. I was just in Kiev, in the Ukraine, where I recorded 12 of my original compositions with a 40-piece woodwind and brass orchestra, which I thought turned out really, really well. I was playing bass and piano on that.
Amplified bass.
My homage bass.
Homage bass, yeah.
Homage bass.
Yeah.
Which turned out really, really well. There's a certain way of playing with an orchestra that I hadn't done before, and so I learned about that. Also learned about the amount of freedom that I could still have with a full orchestra, as long as I had a good rapport with the conductor, which I did. It was my music, so I had a lot of leeway. Yeah, I'm continuing to grow. I've got this wonderful group with the tenor player Joe Manis and Charlie Dogler on drums, and myself. We'll be in Phoenix area. Coming up here, first gigs on February.
Get out of here.
February the 4th at the Arizona School for the Arts. The back. It was standing in the corner. It was in the back. So I went over. I fell in love with the wood. And I went over and turned it around, and the top was off. And I said to Hammond Ashley, who was the original Hammond Ashley, the man who owned the bass, I says, Hammond, where's the rest of the bass? I need that.
It's vital.
He says, well, I'm deworming it. It had acquired a lot of worms, and in its time, and the top was really thick because it was made by a cello maker in Miracord, France, by Guinaud. His name was Nicolas Guinaud. And so I said, listen, Hammond, when you're ready to sell the bass, I want first dibs on it. He says, okay. So 12 years later, he calls me. He says, that bass you're interested in, it's ready. So I drove up to Seattle. I was living in Portland at the time. Drove up to Seattle, checked the bass out. It was fantastic. I got a loan from my dad. I think it cost me $3,000.
Wow.
It's in 6 figures now.
Yeah.
And when John Stoll and I were driving back to New York one time, we were in a big crash, and the bass was just almost destroyed, the top. And it's a long story. We literally duct taped the van together and drove back to Salt Lake City, where there was a bass maker there I knew, violin maker actually, and he took the bass. And this is an amazing story. I've got to share this.
Please.
So I left the bass with him. We were on tour. We hadn't even this happened in Wyoming. Went back to Salt Lake City. He had the bass, I think, for 6 months. He eventually put in 200-year-old wood inlays in the bass here. Going back to Hammond Ashley, it was really thick. So he had to deworm it and then graduate the top of the bass so it was much thinner. Because on this side of the bass, you have a bass bar. On this side, you have a sound post that distributes the sound from the top to the bottom. And if this is real thick, the sound is real dense, you know, and the feel is real dense. So anyways, in Salt Lake City, the man who repaired the bass, his name slips me right now, I can't remember his name. He put 200-year-old wood inlays and totally restored the instrument. In the meantime, I had no bass. So I flew to San Francisco, gentleman there, played a gig, the first gig with it, and where Fred Hamilton was teaching to play. So I flew back to San Francisco, took the bass back. Next stop was in Cincinnati. Went into the bass shop, very famous shop. They had hundreds of basses. I went in there, spent some time, found a beautiful Italian bass. I brought it out. I had to explain to them what had happened to me. And they said, well, go, you know, check out and see what you can find. I found this beautiful bass. I brought it out. I says, this is one. I says, I got 2 record dates in New York, got this big tour. They says, okay, here's the case. He gave me the case. And then I was waiting for him for an invoice. And I said, well, you know, how much do you need? Now, he says, no, just take it. I said, what? Yeah, I said, you don't know me. He says, I know you. He says, just take the bass and bring it back when you're finished.
Wow.
And I thought, well, there's the Lord.
The color pool.
There's the color pool. So I did that, and after 6 months, I flew back to Portland, Oregon. But that was an album I did with Link Chamberlain, a great guitarist.
David Spinoza said he owes everything to that cat. The most mercurial guitarist, nobody knows about him. I love Link Chamberlain.
Link was great. We were very good friends, and we had a great rapport, and we made a record together on Muse. And then I had a record date.
With him as that album. I didn't know you were on that.
It was his date. And then there was a date I did with, it was my date with John Stoll, Gary Hobbs, Tom Harrell, and myself. And yeah, it was a great instrument. Great instrument. We had all these concerts and these 2 record dates set up. So I was very fortunate I was able to get a bass to play. But that's kind of a little story about this instrument.
I knew there was a story behind it.
Oh yeah, there's probably some others that I have forgotten or don't know. Oh, it used to be a 3-string bass. As basses were prior to the 1800s, it was 3-string bass. And this, which gear, I think, was it this gear? These gears are all brass, hand-carved in Mirecourt, France. Forget which one it was now, I should know. Oh, I think it was this, think of the D string. This D string, I think, because it looks smaller. But it was it was 3-string bass, it wasn't a 4-string bass. So,
David, one more thing. It keeps popping into my head. But
could you put your hat on right, correct? It's going
of course,
on.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. The backward way. Thank you, brother. God, what a hip cat.
It's been bothering me.
Can you talk about an addiction?
I'm not sure I understand.
Raphael, can you help me out here?
I mean, I think what's common, and I've a bunch, and we've kind of started exploring this idea of what you find often with artists or musicians is this. There are trends toward addiction oftentimes, and sometimes it feels like there's this penchant for addiction alongside this genius that is manifesting, and sometimes they're working together, sometimes they aren't, but we're trying to explore people's thinking on whether or not there's an intersection there and why that might be.
I don't think so. I really don't. I think certain needs, addiction is a craving for a substance. alcoholics are missing certain hormones in the body, and the body is finding this on alcohol. I think it's a physical thing. I don't think it has anything to do. Maybe some cases. Maybe you just can't pinpoint.
Stan never knew where his sound came from. He was tortured in so many ways. And he was a genius.
Well, he knows where his sound came from. I mean, he knows he was highly influenced by Lester Young. So he knows this, and he, emulated Lester to a great degree, like Dexter did, and you can hear the Lester Young influence in their playing. But you can't make good decisions when you're on drugs or on alcohol. You just can't make good decisions. But I don't think it has anything to do with being a genius or not. I mean, like Fisher, Bobby Fischer,
Yeah.
the great. I mean, he had schizophrenia, not because he played chess. It was an illness. He had schizoid affective illness, and it's hard to know why mental illness happens to musicians like Tom Harrell. Another one has schizophrenia. And it's a debilitating illness. There's no cure for it. It just gets worse and worse and worse. Now, I don't think being a genius, I know a lot of times that a person, when they don't have a solid foundation on which to stand and depression comes, they'll self-medicate and with drugs and with alcohol. And I know Charlie Parker did that a lot. He self-medicated. He was highly depressed, and I think he probably had a bipolar illness. And there was no good medication, neuroleptic drugs at that time that could serve his needs. Because even today, there's not a lot of great neuroleptic drugs that can be used to fight schizoid affective illnesses. So a lot of times those addictions come from that, from trying to.
Some would say that those guys were on the bandstand 4 sets a night, 6 nights a week. They developed huge arthritis. They didn't have pain pills, so they had to use heroin. Was there a divide at any point for you when between people that were on junk and not on junk, and they didn't trust you, or not you specifically, but I mean that seems to be either you were in the club or you weren't, and if you weren't in the club, then you weren't trusted. It's going back in the 50s.
Well, I wasn't back in the 50s. I wasn't that far back. I didn't really come in. I mean, when I worked for Stan Getz, he was on alcohol, and at that time there'd be times when he'd come and play and was stoned.
I mean, it was a high paying gig. It made some dough.
It wasn't as much a high paying gig because he wasn't the most generous.
Right, he was a real cheap guy.
But it was for the experience. It was a great experience playing with him because Joanne Brakeen was playing piano and Billy Hart was playing drums. So,
Joanne Brakeen.
And Joanne was on the gig when I played with Joe Henderson too. So.
Did you join Stan at the same time? Because Stan was calling her every day to join the band. And she's like, I'm with Joe. I'm with Joe. And then one day he called in Indiana and the rest of the tour had gotten canceled. And she's like, well, I guess I can play with you now. You know? I mean, that's, people want us to keep the conversation. People don't,
I came in after that, after maybe she left Joe. Because I wasn't working with Joe. I was in Dobbs Ferry, staying with John Stoll at his apartment, but there were some workmen working. So I went around the block up into Main Street, and there was a printer there who was a friend of John's, and he had a little apartment, a cubbyhole above his print. I says, can I go there and sleep? I says, I got a gig tonight, and I haven't had any sleep. there's this racket down there, I need to sleep. He said, sure. So I went up in this little attic space. No one knows where it is. And all of a sudden the phone rings. It's in my ear, and I pick it up and say, hello, it's Joe Henderson. He says, David, this is Joe. Joe, how did you find me? Here, no one knows where I'm
cow, man.
Joe says, oh, I can find anyone.
He's
Joe
the
was-
phantom, man.
And yeah, he was the fan of it. Joe was something else. But that's after, then he was calling before a gig, I guess.
Just, can you talk about it? Star Dance to me around, and I'm not feeling so great. I can put that on, but Paul McCandless, can you talk about Paul? Give a shout out to Paul.
You know, I really love the sound of the oboe and English horn, and at that time I was a big fan of organ, you know, and loved what they were doing, and so I wanted that sound in this first album, with John Stoll on guitar and Paul McCandless
Steve Gadd.
and Steve Gadd on drums. So that was the quartet. I love the way Paul, I mean, he's a great player, what can you say, you know. He had the chops. He was offered a job with the New York Philharmonic at one time. You don't get offered a job in the New York Philharmonic if you can't play, that's for sure. He's a, you know, great musician, great musician.
David Friesen, thank you for bringing us into your beautiful abode here, and it's always inspiring to see you, and I'll be catching you in Phoenix in a couple weeks, baby.
Yeah, sounds good, Jake. Thanks for the visit, man.
Love always, man. All right?
Appreciate it.
Music is your life preserver. Without it, you drown. It's the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you later.